Hello, everyone. Welcome to Achieving Success with Olivia Atkin. I am your host, Olivia Atkin. Each week, we will discuss the roadmap of achieving your personal and professional success. We give you real-life stories on growing personally and professionally to achieve your life and career goals with the help of some top-notch guests. Today, we are speaking with Steven Pemberton. Steven is the co-founder of Holoco and Elevatum. He is also the host of the podcast Voice Like a Lion, where he creates a space for entrepreneurs to share their stories of overcoming challenges. After a successful 5.5 years in corporate, Steven made a courageous shift in 2020 to pursue entrepreneurship full-time, inspired by watching his wife build a $1 million Amazon business. Today, together, they've launched another $1 million venture on Shopify and developed Holoco, a full-service virtual events company, as well as Elevatum, a growth agency focused on scaling six-figure brands to seven-figure success. Through his work at Elevatum, Steven mentors others in the e-commerce and digital space, helping clients and mentees alike achieve remarkable business growth. His journey also includes a strong focus on giving back. In partnership with a nonprofit, Steven and his wife have provided memorable holiday experiences for over 170 children in need, underscoring his commitment to making an impact both in business and in the community. You can find Steven on LinkedIn by searching Steven Pemberton or going to his website, elevatum.digital, or emailing him at steven@holoco.com. Hello, Steven. It's fantastic having you on the show today.
Hey, Olivia, thank you so much for having me. By the way, incredible job with that bio because you literally listed out all the stuff that I've done. And I went, man, I'm going to have to steal that after this podcast and use that in my bio somewhere.
Well, you could definitely take it. I'll give it to you. And I'm so excited to have you on today because what I expressed in that bio doesn't even seem to cover some of the conversations you and I have had and the impact you've even given me. And just knowing you've become a friend, someone I could count on, someone where we could talk about so many things. I want to dive into all of it. But to start off the show, can you tell me what success means and looks like to Steven Pemberton?
Ooh, that is a great question. So we're coming in hot right off the bat. So, what success looks like to me is doing something that you love, even if you don't love the way that you have to do it from time to time. And what that means to me is doing something that actually helps the people around you, building something that has meaning behind it more than just for your family, but for the families that it directly impacts and for the families that you'll never see that it impacts. That's even a main driving force of why I'm on the podcast, is being on the podcast. Sure, will there be views? Will there be people that may know my name after this? Maybe. But at the end of the day, if there's one thing that's said that somebody can take away and either apply to their life or even down the line, they say, hey, I heard this thing. I don't even remember where I heard it from, but this actually really helped me in a season. This is what it is. That's why I do what I do. So success looks like leaving a legacy behind, not just a real monetary legacy, but also leaving behind something for other people.
And I think that's so important, and it encompasses how you've kind of pivoted as well as you've grown. In the
Yes.
bio, I brought up how you worked in corporate before dabbling and then entering full time the entrepreneurship space. So I want to go back to that. You decided to go into supply chain and logistics and had a very successful career in that space to a point where you left right at what most people would say was the pinnacle space they would like to achieve within their career. I My first question for you is what made you choose supply chain and logistics as a career?
That is a hilarious question because it's choosing is a choice use of words because it kind of chose me. Because and I'll give you a quick backstory on that. And so my wife and I we got married in 2013. I want to make sure I get that correct. So in 2013 we got married, and by before 2014, so before our first year in marriage, we actually both quit our jobs to pursue a business venture at that time. And it wasn't exactly the smartest thing. A, we were super young and had no skills and no finances. So we lost everything in less than 30 days. And what was incredible in that amount of time was I got to learn a lot about myself. One of the things I learned was I was not great with people. I remember, and this is something that actually I really don't discuss all that often, but because I hear it all the time, is that if you want to achieve some level of success, and that's why I love the name of the show, is that if you want to do it quickly, you put yourself in a corner. So if you put your back against the wall, you'll just come out swinging, and that has never been the case for me. My back was against the wall. I had a brand new wife and a brand new baby, and I had no job. And the only way for me to make income was talking to people. And I remember going to the mall and standing there looking like a deer in headlights, not knowing what to say, how to say it, or who to say it to. And I just remember after that, I was living in a basement with my wife and new son and felt like a failure. I'm 20 years old wanting to take my life, and I go, there's no options. I'm done. And I just remember my wife had applied me for this one job. I walk in, I'm doing odd jobs to try to make ends meet. And she said, "Hey, I feel like you're going to get this job." She shows it to me, and it's basically a they called it a warehouse picker role, which means that I'm sitting there, I'm loading pallets and putting it on trucks. And she said it's full time with benefits. And I said, I don't. And at this time, growing up, I had always heard that you had to know somebody or you have to have a degree. So I said, "There's no way I can get that job. I don't have the degree that they're looking for, and I don't have any experience, and I don't know anybody." And I went and interviewed for it anyways, and lo and behold, I got it. And that's how I got into supply chain and logistics. So supply chain and logistics was that's a very loose terminology. Eventually, I was a supply chain and operations manager, but and that's how I got my foot in the door was by being what we called a loader back in 2016. Yep. Nope. 15. So quite a while ago now.
I think it's so important to highlight a few things you brought up. And it's the aspect of when you have your back against the wall, like you said, some people give this idealism that you're just going to come out swinging and everything's going to be worked on and be fine. And I'm definitely the kind of person where give me a timeline or like here's the angle and we will get there. It might
Yeah.
look a little messy and things dates might change or objectives might have to adapt based on if things get delayed or whatever it might be, but we'll get there. We'll figure it out. And sometimes when we're in the thick of it is when I go and you and I had this conversation earlier, like, okay, things are changing so much. I'm a little fogged, but we're gonna figure it out and we're still gonna meet this goal. But I think what happens so many times is people see aspects of entrepreneurship and they're like, "We you just will figure it out. You'll figure out a way to make sure you figure it out and get it done."
Yep.
But unless you have someone that goes, "Okay, I'm gonna raise my hand and you can lean on me so that you can get cleared up," like you and I were discussing, and you had that conversation with me earlier of like, let's just get on a call so you can talk through this, which I appreciated so much, is then that will help me. But when you don't have other people in that space who you know and can count on and can lean on, it's very hard to just keep swinging and
Yep.
get out of that because there's very few people, and I say this a lot, that truly understand in your circle around you what it takes to be an entrepreneur because there aren't as many people doing it. And especially when you're entering a space that is different than potentially where a lot of people sit, even if they are an entrepreneur, it is such a different realm of understanding as well. So for you, as you navigated that space of going, okay, this wasn't the fit, and then getting
Yep.
that job, what were their skills? And I know you said in the beginning it was a loose term of supply chain and logistics, but what were the skills that you were able to leverage from, I don't want to call it a failure because I don't think it is a failure. I think it was ability to learn lessons to then get you
Yes.
where you are today. But what were those lessons that you did take in as an entrepreneur and having that business that did not succeed the way you thought it would be into that full-time role?
So that's a fascinating question because, and I love the way that you put that. And I also love to describe it in that manner because and I'll still use the word failure because people understand that terminology, but and this is the thing is you can do many things and fail at those things, but that does not make you a failure. So it depends on how you label yourself on the other side of it. Unfortunately, a lot of people tie their self-worth to whatever the thing is that they're doing, whether it's a job, a marriage, a business. And if one of those things fail, then they feel like they are a failure. And that's where I found myself walking into this warehouse. And what was really cool about being there was I hated that job. And so I just remember this is where I learned that you can do hard things because I start working this job and within the first month we end up moving out of the basement. We end up renting this house. It was a terrible house on the wrong side of the train tracks, like this little shack. And I would leave that house every single day crying because I just hated the job. I mean, I was working my first week was I think 60 hours. And this is from me working part-time and all these little odd jobs doing maybe 30, 40 hours. First week is 60 hours and that's my training week. And they didn't have equipment for me so I couldn't stay the whole time. That summer was the longest summer I've ever worked. We were averaging 80 hours a week. So I was going in and this was back-breaking work. And I hated it. And so as I'm sitting there crying, leaving the house every day and still going to work, it taught me the skill of you can just show up no matter how you feel. And in that time, what I saw, and the other thing was I needed the job. So I was doing everything I possibly could to be good at the job. And my boss, I'm very grateful for him. And I think that this is what a lot of people will miss on their journey is, and this is why I don't like the term self-made. I don't think anyone is self-made. Like, show me one person who was a multimillionaire who did it all by themselves. They had no clients, they had no customers. Somehow they manifested $1 million into their bank account. They needed people. That's how you get there. For me, it was the supervisor. He saw me working hard and he said, "Hey, I want to let you know something." He's like, "I just see something in you. You can become a," he said, "You can be like me. You can actually move up the food chain here at this place without having the degree and without having the connections." And that's what he told me. And those were literally the terminologies that almost held me back from even walking in the interview. And when he told me that, I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah, I don't have a degree." And for me, looking at him being a manager, because neither of my parents had moved up the food chain, and he was young, he was in his 30s, is I went, okay, if you can do it, then I can do it too. And that was that one moment that shifted. So then I was already working a lot, but I would show up early. I would stay late. I would ask if I could learn something else because then there was a goal and it was achievable. And this is one thing even in business now is I think it's great to have goals. But if you've never seen anyone else around you do it and you don't know anyone who's done it, then it's hard for you to see that as achievable. And that's why when people say set realistic goals, it doesn't have to be realistic for you. It needs to be realistic that you can actually see it. And so for me, when that was a realistic goal in terminologies of he shifted of what it could be, now all of a sudden it actually started all coming together. I asked for more responsibility. I went from hating that job to loving that job because there was a possibility of a way out. And that's even something I've learned about being depressed. Is depression is usually in burnout and anxiety attacks for me have been in a moment where I felt as if I had no options and I saw no way out. And when I got there, that's when most people they break down, and that's what happened to me a few times. So being able to see it through a different light, that's when I started learning the skills of the normal skills of like forklift driving, of helping count returns. So actually using mathematical skills, but then once I got this like faux raise where I stopped having to load pallets, and now all of a sudden I am actually behind a computer working with the guy who's actually getting paid to do this job. I got to learn the real skills of what supply chain logistics looks like, forecasting stuff, being able to QC items, being able to see what orders have gone out, what orders haven't gone out. Like I've been able to see just so many different systems and processes. That was when I started developing real skills and actually becoming fully into supply chain.
And I talk because of my background in supply chain and being a part of ASCM, which is the professional organization for supply chain management. I've seen, and I was a part of that organization before COVID hit. And so I've seen prior to COVID, during COVID, after COVID, of how businesses have able to adjust and really watching so many people go, oh, wait, whether we realized it or not, supply chain is in our business. This
Yep.
is what we're doing. The title might be different, but we have to do all these things. And if we don't, XYZ gets affected. So for me, I always enjoy when people start to realize the impact of supply chain in their everyday life. So for you, as you got into really learning the supply chain aspect of things and the logistics, what were some aspects of that that really opened your eyes?
For me, one of the biggest ones was warehousing. So just sequencing. And this is what got me really interested. This really helped me when I stepped more into e-commerce. It was just understanding that that you can do things and it works, but that doesn't mean that it's efficient. So being in supply chain logistics, going from because I was at three different warehouses in my time working at this corporation, and at each one of them, they did things differently. Makes sense. They're all different sized buildings. They're in different locations with different needs. And I just remember each one of them also functioned in a whole different way as far as if they were efficient or not. The last one I took over, the only reason I got the job was because I was the youngest manager in this Fortune 100 company because the place was a dumpster fire. I mean, they literally had just fired the last guy. They had tried a few different things. They couldn't seem to turn it around, so they just said, "Hey, we'll give you if you want it, you can have it." And I should have known a little better when they just said that. It's like, "Hey, so this location reached out and they just asked if you wanted this role." And of course, I'm just like, "Absolutely." And it worked out for me in the long term. But what I found when I went there was they were getting the job done, but in such an inefficient way that it made every single worker's lives miserable. So what I had to do, and this was the systems first before the people, was I looked at the systems and I saw how they just had their layout. And I'm thinking, okay, so you have the SKU that is what is getting picked the most in the middle. Why? When you could have it first. If you have it first, it's actually going to build you a better foundation so you can build other things on top of it. It's going to make your job much easier. You have the least amount of stuff picked on the other side that's further away from where the dock is. So this means that your travel time is also going to be less. And then what I found through doing that in the warehousing space, once I started fixing those efficiencies, it started helping the psychology of the people. And then also working with the people was amazing. And I can get into that more. But for me, when I think about supply chain, it was that and just the systems in general. Like there were so many different systems that it taught me to look for inefficiencies. And that's where even now when I'm working with e-commerce brands, and especially the ones we typically work with at a half a million to a million, they get there because they have a founder that usually does a really good job with they have some pretty good skills to get them to that level. And then they just have so many inefficiencies, they don't know how to scale and they can't do it. They actually can't do it sustainably or profitably. And what happens with that is when I come in, I'm just looking for those inefficiencies because they may think, well, it's paid marketing. It's got to be the marketing because we just need more leads. If we get more leads, we get more people to the site. That means more sales, which means we're doing better. But you're just creating another inefficiency if you're just cranking up ad spend because you haven't actually fixed your conversion rate. So when I think about it in terms of what logistics has taught me, especially as I became a manager, started going location to location to location, is how to identify inefficiencies, how to actually look at not just numbers, you actually look at the people behind the numbers because you can change a lot of the dynamics in the supply chain logistics with the people, but you can't treat people like a number and expect those numbers to change.
For you, and I definitely want to dive in more to the processes and procedure aspect of things because, as you know, I think that is so important. And we've had discussions about this. So I feel like I got to save it for a little farther down in our conversation because we could go through a very different rabbit hole. But for you, what was the deciding moment for you to leave that company and say, I'm walking away to go into business full time with your wife, starting another entrepreneur venture? And I'm going to add a second part of that question is going through entrepreneurship the first time and seeing
Yep.
how it ended for you, and then going into corporate, what was your initial feelings around it or anxiety, and how did you kind of push through that, knowing what the outcome could possibly be?
So fantastic question because the timeline's pretty interesting there. So I didn't leave my job until June of 2020. But the next business that came around was actually in 2018. So in 2018, this is when my wife started doing Amazon. So at that time, I actually was a manager of an entire warehouse. So I really was in supply chain logistics at this point. But she we were making enough money for her to be a stay-at-home mom. That's what she thought she really wanted to do. And so she's teaching our son, he's homeschooled, she's doing all the things, and then she hates it because she's one of the hardest working women I know. She's one of the hardest working people I know in general. She's taught me so much about life. One of the smartest people I know as well. And so I wasn't too surprised, but also she did kind of the cardinal sin that we all know not to do now, but she made this post on Facebook and just said how she didn't like her life. And when she did that, luckily the person that reached out to her was my mom. And so my mom reaches out to her. My mom had been doing private label on Amazon. She basically created her own brand. And she reaches out to my wife and she says, "Hey, I'm doing this Amazon thing and I'm actually going to pivot into this new business model on Amazon. Do you want to join me?" Send her a few videos, talk to her, and she told her to let her know that Monday. So this was like a Friday night. So over the weekend, she talks to me. I tell her, absolutely not. Like, there's no way. Because the last time we were in a business, well, we know how that went. And we're finally making enough money where we can go on a vacation and have a car and have a home. It's like, there's no way that you're going to go into business. So, of course, a couple days later, she tells my mom yes and does it anyways. And that was the beginning of that journey. And I always like to highlight that I was not supportive. I was not a supportive husband at all. I see because it didn't make sense to me. At that time, I'd grown up in a home where my parents worked a job, both of them for over 30 years. They'd left the job and then now they're retired and they're living on their savings and everything else they got going on in their retirement. And for me, that's all I ever knew. That's all I ever saw, not only with my parents, but everyone in my family. So it didn't make sense to see somebody working, 10, 12, 14 hours a day in the beginning and making nothing. And I would just tell her that. It's like, "Wait, you're letting go of everything else to focus on this. I'm making money. You could go get a job and go if you went and got a job, you could make so much more money than you're making right now because you're making nothing." And what was cool is I remember I was giving her such a hard time. And one day I come home and it's late. It was a 14-hour shift for me and I go to sleep, she's still up. I wake up, she's working. And I put two and two together and realize that she must have just worked a 17-hour shift. And I go, okay, so she might not have the money yet, but she is outworking me. So that's when I started helping her out around the house. I actually started being supportive because I watched her outwork me. And that was then pretty soon after that, still in 2018, I watch her go from someone who's crying anytime she gets a return or a bad feedback or whatever it may be, to by the end of 2019 is $1 million business. Now $1 million in revenue, not profit. Profit margins was 10%. It was terrible. And so we also, because my mom was our financial backer on that business, we really didn't see much of that money. Like me and my wife, we didn't see much at all. I made way more working in my job. So go at the end of 2019, going into 2020, that's where I use my skill set in supply chain logistics because that's where they were hemorrhaging was cost of goods. They're hemorrhaging in cost of goods and with their people, they had 6 employees. So I was helping them restructure that company because I was just sitting there telling them if you go from a million down to a half a million and you take your bottom line from 10% to 20%, you make the same exact amount of money with half the transactions. It's like, so that means you could probably use half the people, which means actually you're going to make more money. And they went, "Oh, that makes sense." So then I'm helping them with that. And then when the world shut down, it actually threw a huge monkey wrench into our plans because we were in the middle of pivoting the business model too. So everything was changing. And so when June 2020 rolled around, it was not as if that business was doing well again. I had actually reached the end of my rope at this corporate job and I was having anxiety attacks really, really bad. And I just remember walking in and saying, "Okay, I feel like I have no options. I feel like I don't have a choice. What do I want to do now?" And I just decided I'm going to put in my 2 weeks and I'm done. And I put in my 2 weeks. I had this new boss who had just started and he was awful. So I put in my 2 weeks notice. He asked me for 2 more weeks. I told him absolutely not. I quit that job not knowing what the future held because I'd never been in business like this. And so going into that space, it was very weird. Like, this is something for anyone who is if you're listening to this and you are actually working a job right now and you're thinking about going full time into a business, here's my 2 cents, is one, if for at least for me now, if you're doing it on the side, it's gonna be a little bit easier of a transition for you, but if you're actually gonna go cold turkey from a job straight into a business, be prepared that you're gonna be sitting there going, "Wait, there's no one telling me what to do. I don't clock in and clock out anymore. Yeah, even if you're a fully remote worker, you go, I'm still on the computer, but I'm not getting you're going to go that first week and that Friday is going to hit and there's not going to be a paycheck come in and you're going to go, wait, this feels way different than I thought it would. And so that was a huge learning curve for me because not only did I have to learn how to actually run a business, I had to learn that there was no one going to tell me how to learn it. Like I had to go find that all for myself.
I think that's so important and so true in the aspects of, you know, even my own experiences. I started the podcast while still working in corporate, and I started achieving success while still being in corporate. However, because I was working in corporate and when I initially started the podcast, it was just a way to give back. I wasn't trying to make any monetary. I actually, until I left corporate, had not pulled in a single dollar into the business because I didn't have time to try to grow the monetization aspect of any part of my business. So when I left, a lot of people were like, "Well, you had already started this." And I was like, "Yeah, but I started the LLC as a way to do the podcast and do this consulting, but trying to get a podcast off the ground." I think there's a level of that, and Steven, you know that unless you put your
Yep.
blood, sweat, and tears or really bring on the right people, if you wanted to grow and reach the most people and have the most impact, you got to put work into it. You got to have that strategy. You have to understand, again, like any business, where to put money towards things, where not to put money towards things, benefits of doing things different ways. And so that's where all my time and energy went. So it wasn't until, and luckily the podcast has grown so fast that when I did leave corporate and I was like, exactly what you're talking about. Oh, wait. Now it's great because kind of like you, I got to my wits' end and I didn't realize the blessing of being part of a mass layoff that gave me,
Yeah.
of that freedom to really go, okay, now I got pushed, right? I got that push that I needed. But it was very much of like, okay, I'm going to lean into this. I made that conscious effort, but that fight or flight mode. And I say you can learn a lot about an individual, whether it's their first business to second business, 0 to 1, whatever it might be. You learn a lot about yourself and just how you handle situations overall
Yeah.
during that time, because I very much started being in that fight or flight. Okay, how did we make this happen? How did we do this? And really trying to figure out in different sections of the company who I can connect to learn more or understand a different aspect of how to do things and just lean into that. Because for me, like you mentioned, when there's not people really doing it around you, it's hard for others to identify what you need, where you need to, like, how they could support you and different things. But it's also, I say, very much an aspect that people forget that you just highlighted, is that there is no more guaranteed money. And I
Nope.
say guaranteed money because most of the time, whether it's a 8 hour day, a 10, 12, whatever that shift might be, even when things unexpectedly come up, unless you are fired or let go, you have that money. You know, at the end of the month, I'm going to have X amount of money in my bank account. These are my expenses. This is how much play money, I call it.
Yep.
Go out to eat, go to the bar, whatever it might be, I have to spend. When you're an entrepreneur, until that money starts coming in, there is no money. You got to act like you're zero and negative, and you got to plan for that. And you also have to understand that as you grow and as you pivot, like you said in 2020 you were doing, is there are going to be those ebbs and flows. And how are you going to handle it? And how are you going to also express that? Because that's been one thing I've noticed too, is I get a lot of responses sometimes when people see certain things or think certain things. They're like, well, you were able to do that. Life must be so good. And I'm like, well, yeah. And yesterday I worked a 16-hour day
Yep.
and, I was up at 5 a.m. starting working already and stop working. I work straight through till 9 p.m.
Yep.
And you're out on events and certain people call and need things or need your guidance. And it's like, now, not every single one of those are clients. Not every
Yep.
single person might end up being a client, but you got to help serve others as well. And you have to understand, where does the value come in for yourself and for others? And I think it's really important to identify that just because people see things and see the glory moments of entrepreneurship, it isn't always like that. There are those stressors, there are those moments, whether entrepreneurs 10 years in want to admit it or not, where there's quarters or months where they go, wait, things are changing. What do we do? The money isn't the same. And I think that we really have to realize that, especially in today's day and age, just like so many new things are coming into play, entrepreneurs have to be on the forefront of what that means for their business. And that's where I want to lead some of this conversation as well. When you went into business full time
Yep.
and grew that business to what it is today, and now helping people in the e-commerce space, what was the biggest thing you learned about the e-commerce space as an entrepreneur yourself?
So the biggest thing, I actually talked to someone about this earlier today, is have a good story. So you understand this with the podcast, you understand this with especially being in more of the PR space, is having a good story, stories sell. And that's something I didn't think mattered coming from supply chain logistics. Okay, you just have to have a good system, you just have to have the right product and they'll sell. But that is not the case. You actually have to have strategies. You actually have to have planning that goes into this stuff. So that has been one of the biggest things. And then it's also, how do you position the story? I've seen it. I've seen it through a few of the clients that we've had. Is that they'll have a cool story and then bury it, and they'll have it on an about me page. And the thing is if I'm on there and I have any kind of buyer intent, which I have to have some if I'm on the website, I have to at least be interested. If I'm on there, I'm not clicking to the about me page. I'm there looking at your products when it comes to an e-commerce brand. If I know you, if I know Olivia, I'm going to go look into you because you are the brand, you are also the product, you have the service, whatever it is. But if I'm selling sweatpants, if I'm selling the water bottle that I just popped up here a second ago, because I'm overcoming a little bit of a cold from this week, is if I'm selling that water bottle and I have this amazing story that the water bottle is made from vibranium that I found in Wakanda, and I bury that in the about me page and it's just on there for $200, and you go, why is this water bottle $200? Why is it, and it's like, why does it, okay, it comes in all these different colors. Okay, this is the benefit of it. But there's not a story of how I found it on an expedition to East Africa or whatever it is. You get to understand what the actual story is. Now all of a sudden, oh, okay, so this isn't just from Walmart and they're reselling it to me. Because the biggest shift that I've seen over the last 6 years being involved in some capacity with e-commerce is drop shipping was really started hot and heavy about 6, 7 years ago. And at that time, everyone was doing it. And that was what everyone told everyone else to do. And so now today, if you want to be different, if you want to stand out, you have to look like you're not drop shipping that stuff. Because now everyone sees Temu, everyone sees Alibaba, and they actually know what that means. Most people know, okay, that's super cheap. I've seen that before. Oh, it's actually on this guy's website. And it's the same exact pictures. They didn't change anything. So you have to position yourself differently. And it's actually not that hard. Like the level to achieve success really isn't as hard to get there as you think. It's just positioning yourself and your story differently. So that's been by far the biggest thing that I've learned. Of course, there's more nitty gritty skill sets that come along with that, but just the number one thing is highlighting your story.
And I think people sometimes, whether it's the mindset of, I'm going to let the product speak for itself,
Yep.
or just not feeling comfortable enough to tell their story, as that will be such a value add, they shy away from it. And I love how you bring up the importance of that, because that is a unique aspect of you and your business. And it can say a lot to a consumer of even why you are starting this business. I mean, I get asked from podcast hosts all the time when it talks about when we started going into my podcast consulting of like, well, what got you into podcasting and how did you see this growth and what have you learned? And I say that story of like just wanting to make the impact. And this is why I started this idea that grew into this. And they're like, oh wow, I can relate to that. And now I see these other values that you haven't even needed to tell me yet. And I think whether it's in that space and more of a service, or you and I have talked about like the apparel company that I'm getting ready to release, and you've been a guiding light because we kind of connected at a time too, where like just coincidentally they were aligning.
Yeah.
Is the fact that even in that space, that is a different story, but you need to highlight what in that space, for example, what drove me to start that apparel company, why I decided to go into that niche within
Yep.
the industry and give back in those ways. And it makes people in certain environments, and I'd love to get your opinion on this as well, people will connect with you as a business owner and you as a business and a brand more than necessarily sometimes the actual product you're selling. But if they had a choice between, and I'll use your analogy, two separate water bottles, almost at the same exact price, they're going to go to the business they feel more connected to
Yep.
support that entrepreneur in that business.
Absolutely. This is something I was having a discussion with someone earlier today, and that's what I was saying to them was it's not about what your product does. It's not about how cool it looks. It's not about what it's made out of. Those things help sell it, but it's what does it make you feel? Like when you see it, you go, "Oh, I feel a certain type of way about it." I mean, if I tell you whatever your favorite hamburger place is, and you have that picture in your mind, and then I tell you McDonald's, you're going to have a different picture in mind. It's going to make you feel a different kind of way. If you're someone who loves McDonald's for the convenience, for the price, whatever it is, you're going to say, "Well, I love this burger, but it's a lot more expensive, and I actually love McDonald's because of this." Or if you absolutely can't stand McDonald's, you're going to think of your favorite burger place and go, "Oh, I just love it. It makes me feel so happy and warm and cozy." And then McDonald's is just disgusting. There's directly opposite things, but there's stuff correlated. So for me, with the story, is a story is your unique selling proposition. And for me, especially early in business, and there's been a few occurrences of this over the past couple of years, is I always thought that it's like I just got to have the best product, I got to be the best, I got to keep learning, and of course you should be on that track to want to be as good as you possibly can be. So yes, please keep learning, and you can, no matter if you are making 1 million, maybe you're making $1, you haven't even you don't even know how to count up to a million yet, and or you want to get there but you haven't even started your business yet. Don't think about how you can be the best, just think about starting and having the unique story of why you started, because that will sell you. And you can directly throw stones at some of these bigger people. This was something starting an agency where it's like, well, I got to have everything in house. I got to have the website developer in house. I've got to have the SEO expert in house. I've got to have everyone in house. And I don't know, I don't have the capital to be able to bring all these people in house. So that means I have to go learn it. And that's just not true. And what I've found, two different things is one, you can connect with amazing people and actually start sharing business with other people. As long as you vetted them, they're really good. They're good at what they do, and they have a unique story and they also have the same values you do. Great. Guess what? People are all going to win. It's going to be a win-win-win, win for you, win for the client, and win for this other business. And that's how we've been able to grow. And then secondly, is if I never feel like I'm in competition with anyone. The way that I have uniquely positioned our e-commerce growth agency is I'm basing it off of I have been a two-time founder who's grown to over $1 million a year in the first 12 months of launching e-commerce stores. So I want to help you, a insert X brand that is at a $500,000 and you've been there for the last 3 years and you want to scale to 1 million. So for me, is that's who I am. I sell the story. I'm not telling them, hey, I do paid marketing and this is how I do paid marketing. I used to sell all the features. I used to do this. This is how I do this, and this is why it's really good, and this is why this person's not as good. But it's the story that sells so much more, and you can actually charge way more for the story than you can just based on the features. You can go and find people on Upwork and Fiverr to do the same exact thing that you're doing for cheaper, but they don't know how to leverage the story of why they're doing it yet. So they're just trying to fight everyone else based on price. and that will and if that is a race to the floor, you don't want to win. You want to be the higher price option, and the only way you can be higher price is to have the unique story.
That is something, I find so valuable as well when we talk about businesses in general. And I haven't, the way you're saying that story and really how to connect it to that business, I haven't thought about that in the e-commerce space as much. And now my mind is even turning of like, what are the e-commerce that are doing that? And how does that make you feel? And that's what question I kind of have to the listeners to think about as well. When it comes to e-commerce stores, whether you want to start it, whether it might be an Etsy store, a Facebook marketplace you want to start dabbling in, or Shopify, whatever it might be, and however big you want to take it, what are the businesses that you think of that really pull you in to buy a product that are tying stories into it? As you brought that up, I thought of Tom Shoes
Yep.
and the fact that they really, and my mind is thinking about this as we're talking about it, is they really grew quickly because of their commitment to give back to the community. You buy a pair of shoes, we give a pair of shoes.
Yep.
And people connected with that and resonated with that. And then you saw their growth, skyrocket quickly because everyone felt like they were doing something good and the company was able to do something good in return because of them buying the product. And so that I think is really important aspect that you bring up. For you, what advice would you give someone who is trying to elevate,
Yep.
that might become a client of yours in the e-commerce space that you typically see people not thinking about until you sit down with them, that you're like, if you had thought about this one thing, even if we would still be working together today, but it would have helped you get to me faster. What would be that that one thing, or maybe it's a few?
Yeah, so the one thing I think about immediately, because I see this as something that happens to brands pretty much as soon as they hit about $20,000 to $30,000 a month, is that they hit this threshold and they go, well, the only way for me to get to the next level, I'm going to get to a half a million to a million, is I got to add more products because that's the only way I can get a higher average order value. And unfortunately, that's not the case. So what I've seen is there's a client that comes to mind. There's two of them actually. They come to mind immediately that one of them is much higher priced and another one is very low priced. And what I found was both of them want the same thing. Both of them want a higher average order value, but both of them have a ton of products that don't sell. So you're putting a huge strain on your supply chain for no reason. And that's eating up cash flow, that's eating up time, that's eating up resources for nothing. And what's interesting is that where the resources need to go, because especially for bootstrap founders, which most people are going to be bootstrapped, especially for their first couple businesses, you need as much resources and cash flow as you can in the right places. So in the beginning, let's say that you started, let's say you start your brand. I'll use you as an example. Is with your apparel line, is you let's say you have six products, and that's what you start with. And then over time, let's say over the first 6 months, you notice that there's three of them that sell really, really well, and the other three don't sell at all. It would be probably beneficial to cut those other three, focus all of your spend, your time, your energy, your social media posts on those three, and then do that again in another 6 months or in a couple months, however fast it starts to grow, because then you can see, okay, why is this not selling? It's like if there's three left, if these three items left, you can look at those three, see how much they sell, and then there's going to be one that just stands out. If you find that one that stands out, we call that the hero product. That's the one that everyone comes to your site, they see, they love it, they want to get it. Those are the ones you're going to have the best reviews for, and that's the product that you just take and you spotlight that thing and you make different colors of it, and then you sit there and you'll change whatever the lower reviews are. If it's, well, it's not as good a quality as I want it to be, now great, you have a little bit more cash flow. Instead of investing it into more products, you invest it into that product, you make that product better. And I think that that's one of the biggest things for me is with these, even with these two brands, both of them went wide on product lines, just trying to capture as many customers as possible to drive that average order value. When unfortunately, they could have just focused more time and energy on the things that were already getting sales. So for any brand in the beginning is that one of the suggestions I made to actually the lower price store was they just needed to be a one store product or a one product store. So cut everything else. They had like 20, 30 products. Cut everything else. They had so their product was about $35 and their cost on that, their COGS was $3. It was dirt cheap. So they could sell one and then sell one for half price and still be making pretty good money. So why would you not? And why would you instead try to sell a hoodie for $50 and your cost of goods is 26? Like, doesn't make sense. When you could focus all your time, energy, and effort into where it's going to be a cash cow if you can figure it out. And the sales was directly proportionate to the cheaper item anyways. It was 99% went to this cheaper item. There was maybe 5 sales and for the hoodie there was over 3,000 sales for the cheaper item, so you know what people want. People are showing you what they want based on their dollars. So that is the biggest thing. If I could basically boil it all down to one word, is focus. You just got to focus on the one product, the one thing, and then launch. And then you reiterate on that product, make it better. And over time, you can start adding products on and do it the right way, which is ask questions of your already existing clients. Or if you don't have clients or customers, however you want to describe them, is you go and you talk to your friends, your family. Go talk to people who aren't your friends, who are going to be actually mean to you and say, hey, I just created this product, or I really want to create this, or here's my prototype. What do you think about it? And if they say it sucks, and you get it sucks from 10 people, out of the 10 people you talk to, it probably sucks. But if you get, hey, this is really good, and I think this is something that I would like out of 8, out of the 10, then you could actually sell people right then. Hey, so this is actually something. Would you be interested in actually buying this? You said it's really good. Yeah, I think that this is something that I could really use, or looks really good. This is really cool. Great. Here's my pre-order page. Go ahead and pre-order it. I have a shipment coming in. You don't even have to have the shipment yet. You're just getting proof of concept. But you can sit there and say, hey, yeah, go ahead and lock it in right here. Pre-order rate, you get it 50% off. And that's just because you took time to do this with me today. So that's just free game for getting a brand off the ground and doing it pretty much for free. I mean, you're doing it really cheap with just one product, one prototype.
And you just answered my next question, which was kind of going to be around this idea of, as you mentioned, a lot of people think you need to offer 20, 30 products to start. They need the whole line, every option. Um, and that is something I've even seen in discussions with people as I have brainstormed stuff. It's like, they're like, well, why don't you also, you've like all these great concept ideas. Why don't you
Yeah.
do all of them? And I'm like, "Okay, let's, like, bring it in a little bit."
Yep.
Let's or, like, they start throwing 20 other ideas at you, and you're like, "Okay, we can't do all 20 ideas." Right? Not off the bat, we can't go up to 60 items, any of that. They're crazy numbers, guys. I'm just throwing numbers out. But I wanted to give that preface. But what do you think is a good number to start with? Whether it's that one, or what do you find people's sweet spots are on the different products they offer to start?
It depends on the niche. So, depending on the niche, so when I think about pet, I'm not sure why this is the first one that popped into my head. Is there is a brand, they're called Frenchie, actually. So they're a French bulldog brand that they started with a harness that is reversible. So that was it. Like they started with one product. And what was cool is now they have a ton of products and they have all these different brands that are on there. They've expanded over time, but they started with one and they just made it unique. So it has fun designs on one side, and you can reverse it. It has fun designs on the other side. So I think it also just depends. Like when it comes to apparel, I would say apparel you could have a few things. I don't think you need to have a whole jogger set. So you don't need to have a hoodie. You don't need to have the joggers with it. You don't need to go find a way to create shoes too. I think it depends on who you want to be, and it depends on what the mission is. So this is why it ties back into the story is why are you starting it in the first place? So on the flip side, on what the customers don't see is why are you starting it? Why does it matter to you? If it matters to you that you want to get recognition where recognition is due, you want people to be able to see this and say, "Oh yeah, this is a group of people who do not get seen as much as they should." If that's the reason why, or you want to support people who you know they don't get seen, but they're a hungry small niche that nobody is supporting and you feel like you want to support them, then I would actually just ask them, "Hey, what would you want?" Like, I would start there. It's like, "Hey, you are the people, you're my ideal customers. This is what I'm thinking about making. What would you, if I had it, what would you buy?" And if they say if it's across the board, a t-shirt, then just start with the t-shirt. If it's, "Hey, I think that because of the location of where we're at, I think a hoodie would be the best. I think it would be a hoodie and sweatpants. Those two would do really well." Then maybe having 3 or 4 products is fine. I think for most people, if you're starting a brand and you're starting it for whatever reason, you want to be a home decor line in the future, start with one thing. Like, just prove one thing in the marketplace. Because if you prove one thing and then you start scaling that up, you actually have more cash flow, you have more proven things to then go invest in actually getting more things created and shipped to you so you can ship out. But I think what happens in the beginning, excuse me, is a couple things happen. Is one, people will kind of shotgun approach it and come up with a lot of products, which then puts a huge strain on their cash flow. So then they have all this inventory in their garage usually, because I that's what we used to do. And what happens is then there'll only be one thing that really sells, and now they're stuck with all this inventory and they don't know what to do with it. So sure, maybe you have one, two products that are doing really well, but you still got 10 grand worth of stuff in your garage that's not selling. You've only sold 10 grand. People only see that you've made 10 grand, but you're not even yet, because that, with cost of goods and everything else, you're still at a loss, which makes it really hard in the beginning to scale. So for me, I always think if you're bootstrapping it, unless you have a big 401k or something you're investing into it, a couple, 10, $20,000 is just laying there. I would say if you've got less than $5,000 and that's not all going into it, like you're actually trying to live off of some of this and you're trying to strategically grow, then starting with 1 or 2 products is the best. And doing it where you've actually gone and talked to people, figure out what they want, maybe get some of those pre-orders, get them on a wait list, whatever it is, so that way, when you launch, you already have built-in customers, or you give. This is something that we did in the beginning. We had a little bit more capital. Is we got, I think, 4 or 5 of our first items, and then we just sent them to our parents, and we just had them give us 5-star reviews, so it looked like we actually had sales on the day that we launched it. So there's little nuances that you can do like that, but yeah, I would definitely say if you're bootstrapping it and you don't have a lot of capital, you really just need to.
Well, and I appreciate that insight, and I think it's a great place to wrap up for today. Stephen, how can people get in touch with you if they want to connect with you?
So you said this right at the beginning, and I love it. LinkedIn is definitely one of the best ways to get a hold of me. I'm on there all the time. It goes directly to my phone. Look for Steven Pemberton. Kind of looks like Jason Momoa. I need to update the picture. My hair's a little longer now. But if you find Steven Pemberton looks like Aquaman, that's most likely me. If not, please take a screenshot. Then find me for real and send it to me. I would love to see that. And then the other best way is elevatem.digital. On there, if you are an e-commerce brand that's doing about around a half a million, even a little less, I would love to still have a conversation. Right there is my booking link. It is my booking link, and you will get me. If it's not anyone else, it's not a sales guy. It is actually me.
I love that. And loved how you just emphasized that because a lot of people sometimes would be cautious. So I appreciate you doing that. And thank you, Stephen, for all of your insight today.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
And a few of our key takeaways from today's conversation is doing something you love, even if you don't love how you have to do it every day. I think that was such a important aspect of what Stephen said in the beginning, but also how that sometimes when we're in the thick of it, whether it's running our own business, doing our job every day, there's not every aspect we love of it. And so we have to remember sometimes is why do we love this? And why are we doing this? As well as you can't just show up, you can just show up no matter how you feel. Show up, be present, whether that's in work, your personal aspect of life. Sometimes that's all that matters. That's all that people need from you is know that you're there, know that they can rely on you, and know that you will give it your all no matter how you're feeling. And sometimes working through those moments or being present in those moments when you might be feeling down or might not be feeling your best will prove to you that you could also do it, which it can be such an amazing feeling sometimes, as well as identify your inefficiencies. I think that what Stephen mentioned here and the importance of understanding the procedures, how you do stuff, the processes, whether it is running a company or running a department, if you don't understand your own inefficiencies, you won't be able to grow the team, the group, the business. So lean into that. Go, okay, we're going to sit here, we're going to figure this out. Because in order of having that hard discussion or hard realization, you're able to move forward and grow, as well as what is your story and how do you want to express it? And this was one of the challenges I leave the listeners with as well is what is your story? How do you want that story to be expressed in the products you sell, in the things you do, in the way you give back to the community? What do you want your story to be, and how do you want to use your voice? This was a great episode with our top notch guest, Steven Pemberton. Thank you for listening and have a successful day.